Chapter 33 of J.S. Bach, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. J.S. Bach, Volume 2 by Albert Schweitzer, translated by Ernest Newman. Chapter 33, The Masses. Subtitle: BG 6, B minor Mass, BG 8, 4 small masses, BG 11 for Sanctus. When Bach petitioned on the 27th July 1733 for the title of court composer, he sent his sovereign the parts of the Kyrie and the Gloria of a Mass in B minor. He did not send the score. This he kept for himself. It was a frequent practice at that time to perform large works without a score. These parts are now in the King of Saxony's private library at Dresden. As they show no signs of having been used, it is doubtful whether the work that Bach wrote in order to secure the Kapellmeistership was ever performed. He had written out most of the parts himself and added phrasing signs and marks of expression. The Gloria consists not only of the Gloria in excelsis et in terra pax hominibus bonae voluntatis, but comprises all the sections pertaining to this in the Mass: Laudamus, Gratias, Domini, qui tollis, qui sedis, coniem cum sanctu spiritu. It is curious that Bach should have described the Kyrie and Gloria on the title page of the original parts as Missa, and designated the succeeding sections, the Credo, Sanctus, and Hosanna, as independent parts, whereas, of course, it is the ensemble of them that constitutes the Mass. Emmanuel also enumerates the four parts separately in the catalogue of his musical library. Bach also entitles four smaller Kyrie and Gloria Masses. His reason for this strange nomenclature is unknown. The designation of the Kyrie and the Gloria as Masses has nothing to do with the Missa Brevis. Spita thinks that the Credo, Sanctus, and Hosanna may have been written between 1734 and 1738. Bach does not appear to have sent these sections to the court. The parts of the Credo came into the possession of Emmanuel, who performed this section of the Mass in Hamburg, with an orchestral introduction of his own. We also possess the parts of the Sanctus as they are now in the Royal Library at Berlin. At the end of the original score of this section, there is a note to the effect that the parts are with Count Spork in Bohemia. Franz Anton, Count of Spork, was the governor of Bohemia. He had close relations with the Leipzig artists and scholars. He seems to have been deeply interested in music. When he heard of the invention of the French horn in Paris, he sent two of his servants there to learn how to play the instrument. He died in 1738, during Bach's lifetime, that is to say, at his estate of Lisse. Bach would not fail to claim his property from the heirs, so that the parts in the Berlin library are no doubt those from which the governor of Bohemia used to have the Sanctus performed for him. As a matter of prudence, and perhaps in the hope of finding the parts of Hosanna, the Bachgesellschaft in 1854 requested the director of the Prague Conservatoire to make inquiries as to what had become of the Count's music. An official of the estate replied that many years ago a lot of old music had been partly given away, partly lost. Some of it had been given to the gardeners to wrap around the trees. Footnote: see the preface to BG 6. Whether the parts of the Sanctus are those that Bach sent to Count Spork cannot now be accurately determined, the note at the end being undecipherable. End footnote. Thus we possess the complete original score of the B minor Mass, which belonged to Emmanuel, and the original parts of the Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, and Sanctus. The whole work was probably never given by Bach in a Leipzig service, but it is certain that he performed the separate sections. He would presumably give the Credo on Trinity Sunday. The Kyrie he could use in the principal services during times of mourning, as at these periods the cantata was omitted and the Kyrie was sung. Of the Gloria we possess a score specially made in 1740 with the title Festo Nativitatis Christi. Footnote. For information regarding this Gloria, see Spitta 3, page 40. This score was not available when the BG edition of the B minor Mass was prepared in 1855. End of footnote. It must be added that some of the sections of the B minor Mass are borrowed from other works. The Gratias comes from the cantata Wir danken dir, number 29. The Qui tolles from Schaut doch und seht, number 46. The Patrum omnipotentem from Gott wie ist dein Name, number 171. The Crucifixus from Weinen klagen, number 12. The Hosanna from the secular cantata Preis dein Glück. The Agnus Dei from the cantata Lobet Gott in seinen Reichen, number 11. These are not mere transfers, however, but rearrangements, often so thoroughgoing that it is more correct to speak of their being suggested by the original than borrowed from it. We can estimate the musical value of these numbers without the necessity of taking into account that they exist in other forms and other texts of the same nature. The salient quality of the B minor Mass is its wonderful sublimity. The first chord of the Kyrie takes us into the world of great and profound emotions. We do not leave it until the final cadence of the Dona nobis pacem. It is as if Bach had here tried to write a really Catholic Mass. He endeavours to present faith under its larger and more objective aspects. Some of the splendid and brilliant chief choruses have quite a Catholic tinge, yet in the other movements we get the same subjective, intimate spirit as in the cantatas, which we may regard as the Protestant element in Bach's religion. The sublime and the intimate do not interpenetrate. They coexist side by side. They are separable from each other like the objective and the subjective in Bach's piety, and so the B minor Mass is at once Catholic and Protestant, and in addition as enigmatic and unfathomable as the religious consciousness of its creator. The dual nature of the work is evident even in the earliest movements. The introductory Kyrie eleison is a large conception. It sends up a solemn supplication to God. The universal Christian Church cries to its Father in heaven and bends before him. We seem to see nation after nation pouring into the assembly and joining in the prayer. Footnote. It is incomprehensible how some conductors can end this section pianissimo instead of fortissimo. The final entry of the theme in the bass cannot be too powerful. End footnote. The Christe eleison, on the other hand, is sunny and serene. It is the soul's glad and confident prayer to its Redeemer. In the last Kyrie, the gloom of the first is overcome. We no longer hear cries and entreaties, but a quiet, composed lament. The tranquil motion and the transfiguration of the bitter harmonies are like a symbol of the faith and hope that are mingled with this lament. The interludes with the animated in which we hear a reminiscence of the ardent supplication of the first chorus, are only there to throw into higher and higher relief the tranquillity of the main theme. There is some doubt as to how the Gloria should follow the Kyrie. There is a temptation to get a strong contrast by commencing the one immediately after the other. It is better, however, to interpose a fairly long pause between them, during which orchestra, choir, and audience can traverse in silence the ground between the Kyrie and the Gloria and ascend from the depths of the minor to the heights of the major harmonies from which, with the first D major chords, the world of praise and thanksgiving will be opened out before them. It is not to the advantage of the movement to read too much into Bach's marking of vivace. The first section of the chorus must end without any perceptible rallentando and diminuendo before the et intera pax. That this second part is not to be taken piano is proved by the noticeably heavy orchestration. The length of the movement makes it undesirable to adopt so slow a tempo as the usual one. The build of the phrases in Hominibus Bonae Voluntatis shows that Bach wishes the et intera pax to be sung with a certain animation. The fine violin accompaniment to the Laudamus Te is a typical specimen of Bach's joy motive. In the Gratias Agimus, as in the last Kyrie, there is a conflict between the tempi of the two related themes. The wonderfully cheerful and tranquil theme expresses the opening words, Gratias agimus tibi. The propter magnam gloriam tuam is set to a much more lively motive. Propter magnam gloriam tuam. Their diversity is so great in Bach's eyes that as a rule he does not employ them together, but makes the chorus up of a succession of segments constructed now on this motive, now on that. The charm and the difficulty in the performance of this movement consists in giving each of the segments its own appropriate tempo without impairing the unity of the tempo as a whole. The Gloria, Laudamus and Gratias constitute a single idea and should not be separated by the slightest pause. After the Gratias we may pause for a moment and then begin with the Domine, the praise of Christ that continues to the Credo. The close connection of the texts here, the Domini, qui tollis, qui sedes, quoniam cum sancto spiritu, must be reproduced in the succession of the movements. The solos in these movements are generally taken much too slowly, so that, especially when the singers indulge liberally in rallentandi, the natural animation of the music suffers. Footnote. I was particularly convinced of the preferability of a quick and tense tempo for these movements by a performance of the B minor Mass at Heidelberg under Professor Wolfram. His tempi in general were the ideal ones for the work. It is to be wished that he would make them available for general use by giving the metronome numbers. The remarks in the text as to the tempo in the solos being too slow applies to the whole of the B minor Mass. The Laudamus Te is, as a rule, almost dragged. End footnote. In the tutti parts of the Quoniam, it is advisable to strengthen the two obbligato bassoons by two or more violoncellos. In the accompanied parts one would almost venture to recommend an alternation between the two solo bassoons and two solo violoncelli. Between the Cum Sancto Spiritu and the Credo comes the first large incision in the B minor Mass. From this point to the Sanctus, all the sections are closely connected. They fall into three groups. The first, which relates to the Father, contains the Credo and the Patrem Omnipotentem. The second, which relates to Christ, consists of the Et in unum Deum, the Et incarnatus est, the Crucifixus, and the Et resurrexit. The third, dealing with the Holy Ghost, embraces the Et in Spiritum Sanctum and the Confitio. The three groups should be separated from each other by very short pauses. Within each group, the movements must follow each other without a break. Footnote. So much stress is here laid upon the right grouping of the numbers of the B minor Mass because it is of great importance to the effect, and many modern conductors do not know enough of the liturgy to avoid making false and capricious breaks in the continuity of the work. End footnote. The Symbolum Nicenaeum is a hard nut for a composer to crack. If ever there was a text put together without any idea of it being set to music, it is this, in which the Greek theologians have laid down their correct and dry formulas for the conception of the Godhead of Christ. In no mass has the difficulty of writing music for the Credo been so completely overcome as in this of Bach's. He has taken the utmost possible advantage of any dramatic ideas in the text. When emotion can be read into it, he does so. The external configuration of the text is itself masterly. The sections that lend themselves to brilliant tone painting are worked out twice. Others are compressed and treated continuously. The effect of the Confiteor mostly depends on the precise management and the close connection of the final periods of the Credo. One of the most striking features of the B minor Mass in general, and the Credo in particular, is Bach's excellent Latin declamation. His most daring coloratura are only the artistic intensification of the natural syllabic values and accents of the words. The Theologian Bach also had a hand in the composition of the Credo. He knew what the Greek fathers had in their minds when they took such pains to prove the identity of Christ with God, and yet assert a diversity and independence of persons. To the dogmatist Bach, the parallel passages of the Et in unum Dominum, Deum de Deo, God of God, Lumen de Lumine, Light of Lights, Genitum non factum, begotten, not made, consubstantialem, of like substance, were not merely empty sounds to be turned into music. He knew what the formula meant and translated them into terms of music. He makes both singers sing the same notes, but in such a way that it does not amount to the same thing. The voices follow each other in strict canonic imitation. The one proceeds out of the other, just as Christ proceeds of God. Even the instruments take part in the canon. They signify in a special way the community of substance and difference of persons. The notes are always phrased two distinct ways in the different instruments, either or. Bach thus proves that the dogma can be expressed much more clearly and satisfactorily in music than in verbal formulae. His exegesis of these passages in the Nicene Creed has resolved the disputes that excited the Eastern world for many generations and finally delivered it over to Islam. His presentation of the dogma even makes it acceptable and comprehensible to minds for which dogma has no attraction. In the dewy, fresh and flowing music of the Et in unum Spiritum Sanctum, Bach's imagination had been fired by the word vivificantum. He depicts the Spirit as that which makes alive. At the end of this movement, at the descendit de celis, he descended from heaven, we get the motive of falling. In the Et incarnatus est, the Holy Spirit hovers over the earth, as if in quest of a being into which it can enter. At the words et homos factus est, it sinks to a restless conclusion. At the same moment the motive appears in the bass, symbolizing the spirit being abased into flesh. The crucifixus is constructed upon a basso ostinato, formed from the chromatic motive of grief. The chorale writing is soft and vaporous, like that preceding it, so that the inexpressible sadness of the harmonies has a touch of the superterrestrial and the transfigured in it, as if the composer had in his mind the "it is finished" of the dying Lord. The Et Resurrexit represents the victorious jubilation of redeemed mankind. Note should be taken not only of the fine line of the bold theme, but of its perfectly natural declamation. The chorus upon the credo has for its theme the well-known splendid old intonation of the creed. Credo in unum Deum. The steadfast and confident quaver sequences in the bass symbolize the firmness of the faith. They are most effective when the individual notes are not tied but detached from each other with an uptake grouping. The tempo must not be too slow, or else the augmentation of the theme at the end, commencing in the vocal basses and extending to the whole movement, will not be perceptible to the hearer. Bach could not base the Confiteor chorus on the old church tone, as this does not yield a theme capable of being developed polyphonically. He is thus compelled to invent a theme of his own, but he twice introduces the old intonation, from the 73rd bar onwards, in a stretto between the bass and the alto, and again in triumphant breadth in the tenor. It runs thus: I acknowledge one baptism for the remission of sins. Very characteristic of Bach, again, is the setting of the Et expecto resurrectionem mortuorum. We should expect music with something mysterious and a touch of longing in it. Instead of this, the orchestra expresses, by means of the joyous resurrection motive, the exaltation of the elect at the last day. Bach lets himself be guided by the correct feeling that in the credo everything presses onward to a big conclusion, which he must not retard by music of too intimate a kind. Note that in the Patrem Omnipotentem he passes over the mystical suggestions of the word invisibilium, creator of all things visible and invisible, because he does not wish to interrupt the brilliant stream of music. Many conductors imagine that Bach, following his usual practice, meant to bring this word out saliently and to express the mystery of the creation of the invisible underworld, and they try to rescue what there is to be rescued of the word by having it sung pianissimo and with a rallentando, or rather by wishing to have it so sung, for this method is so opposed to the structure of Bach's music that it always comes to grief, and only results in making the choir unsteady and the conclusion of the movement unintelligible. For the Sanctus, Bach, who was a student of the Bible, has had in his mind's eye the beginning of the 6th chapter of Isaiah, from which the words are taken. There it is told how the Lord sat on his high throne, surrounded by the seraphims, who cried unto one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts, so loudly that the posts of the door moved. Bach's music, as Spitta noted, aims at expressing this crying to one another. As this can hardly be done with the 5-part polyphony that he elsewhere employs in the Mass, he here writes the chorus in 6 parts. There is hardly anything else in all music that expresses so perfectly the idea of the sublime. The basses that have to support these polyphonic triplets move along in the most tranquil and powerful step motive to be found in all the scores of Bach. A marvellous effect is made by the trumpets and kettledrums, which Bach employs with somewhat unusual discretion. In the Pleni sunt Celi and the Hosanna, again, he observes a wise moderation in this respect that is of inestimable advantage to the whole movement. In the Benedictus and the Agnus Dei we get perhaps the clearest light on the difference between Bach's conception of the Mass and Beethoven's. For Beethoven, the symphonist, these 2 sections are the culminating point of the drama of the Mass as he conceives it. For Bach, who thinks in terms of the Church, they are the point at which it all dies slowly away. In Beethoven's Agnus Dei, the cry of the pained and terrified soul for salvation is almost dreadful in its intensity. Bach's Agnus Dei is the song of the soul redeemed. In the Benedictus he has probably made use of some previous composition of his, so at least one assumes from the rather abrupt style and the repetitions of the words. The Dona Nobis Pacem is also a confident and hopeful laudation of peace rather than a prayer for it. There is deep significance in the fact that Bach has these words sung to the music of the Gratias Agimus, we thank thee. A tender style of playing does not suit the character of the movement. When the B minor Mass was published, the serious error was made of omitting the figuring of the continuo in the Credo, for the reason that it was in Emmanuel's writing and could not be proved to have an authentic origin. Granting that the figuring is Emmanuel's own, it is, at any rate, better than none at all, since no one was in a better position to replace a lost original than he. Moreover, it is almost certain that his continuo part is a copy of the original. The editor's suspicions were probably aroused by his noticing that the figured chords were not always congruous with those of the obligato parts. But on these grounds he might have rejected many an original figuring by Bach, the genius of which is proved precisely by the fact of its independence. It is to be hoped that the error will be corrected by printing Emmanuel's figuring, which is in the Berlin Library, in the new edition of the Bach-Gesellschaft. Anyone who has had to accompany the B minor Mass on the organ knows how difficult it is, even for the player familiar with Bach, to divine the harmonies, especially in the solo pieces and the Et incarnatus est. The Bach-Gesellschaft score is misleading again in the Credo and the Confiteor. According to this, the Credo is to be sung by the choir with organ accompaniment, while the first and second violins play the theme. In the Confiteor, only the organ is to be employed. If the BG score is a correct reprint of the parts that once belonged to Emmanuel, then the error must be in these. Bach certainly did not desire these 2 choruses to be accompanied only by the organ. In the whole of his scores there is no other example of the violins alone playing an obligato above the chorus in this fashion. The Credo and the Confiteor are to be given like the last Kyrie, that is, the strings and woodwind must double the voice parts. Further, if we consider how often Bach in motet choruses of this kind doubles the voice parts with the brass, it is hardly credible that they would have been idle here, especially as the notes are long ones. It needs no proof that the two obbligato violin parts in the credo should be supported by, at any rate, the woodwind if they are to be heard. It is not less certain that the intonation of the credo that enters in augmentation in the basses towards the end, as well as the confiteor intonation, first in the basses and altos, then in the tenors, cannot be heard even by the hearer who knows they are in the score, unless an instrument comes to the assistance of the voices. Footnote. At the performance conducted by Bach himself, he told the instrumentalist by word of mouth to play from the vocal parts. He would not say so in the score because it was self-evident to him. This explains why the score and the parts give a wrong idea of how Bach wished the work to be performed. Against these views it may be objected, with some show of reason, that in the Patrem Omnipotentem and the Et Expecto Resurrectionem, Bach wishes to heighten the effect of the instruments by keeping them silent until then. The reply to this is that he would nevertheless have employed the strings and woodwind to support the voice parts, and that the necessity of bringing out clearly the intonation of the credo and the confiteor certainly outweighed all other considerations. The scale is turned by the reflection that in the cantatas he always accompanies motet choruses of this kind with strings, woodwind, and trombones, and that in the last Kyrie, which is built on precisely the same lines as the credo and the confiteor, all the instruments previously employed are used to strengthen the chorus. End footnote. Even then, with our heavy choirs, the intonations demand the support of the organ as well. In these passages the organist should play the continuo bass on the pedal, give the harmonies with one hand on a subsidiary manual, and with the other hand play the passages in question on the great organ with the 8 and 4 feet principals and mixtures. Only in this way can these antique melodies come triumphantly through the mighty polyphony in the way that Bach contemplated. The Kyrie and the Gloria were published in 1833 by Nageli of Zurich, who had acquired the original score after the death of Schwenke, Emmanuel's successor. Their poor reception was not of the kind to encourage Nageli to bring out the whole work, and the remainder was first published in 1845 by Simrock of Bonn. In a copy of the score of the Credo that was formerly in the possession of the Berlin Singakademie, Zelter has altered certain high passages in the trumpets with a view to making them more playable, and indicated some excisions. This suggests that he had performed this section of the Mass, or had intended to do so. The letters to Goethe throw no light on this matter. The first complete performance of the Mass was that of the Berlin Singakademie in 1834 and 1835. Perhaps the most perfect performance the work has ever had was that by the Berlin Philharmonic Choir under Siegfried Ost. Footnote. On the 24th of April 1896 in the Garrison Church. End footnote. When Bach received the title of court composer, he sent 4 Kyrie and Gloria, which he called masses, to the court as tokens of his assiduity. Footnote. 2 of the masses, those in G major and A major, were certainly written about 1739. Spitter rightly supposes that the 2 others in G minor and F major belong to the same period. As Bach had no opportunities for the performance of masses of this kind, we can only assume that he intended them for Dresden. End footnote. As he was in a great hurry, he did not waste time in writing new works, but to a large extent made these masses up out of cantatas. Footnote. The following movements can be traced to cantatas in our possession. Mass in F major. The Qui tolles and the Quoniam are derived from Herr deiner Augen sehen nach dem Glauben, number 102, and the Cum Sancto Spirito from Daru ist erscheinen, number 40. Mass in A major. The Gloria is derived from Halt im Gedächtnis Jesum Christ, number 67, the Key Tolus from Sehe Jesu das deine Gottesfurcht, number 179, the Quoniam from Gott der Herr ist Sonn und Schild, number 79, and the Cum Sancto Spiritu from Erforsche mich Gott, number 136. Mass in G minor. The Kyrie is derived from Herr deiner Augen, number 102, the Gloria from Alles nur nach Gottes Willen, number 72, the Gratias, Domini and Cum Sanctu Spiritu from Es wortet alles auf dich, number 187. The Mass in G major, the Kyrie and the Quoniam are derived from Sei du das deiner Gottesfurcht, number 179, the Gloria and the Domini Deus from Gott der Herr ist Schon und Schild, number 79, the Gratias from Warum betrübst du dich, number 138, and the Cum Sanctu Spiritu from Wer Dank opfert, number 17. For further information, see the preface to BG 8. The Kyrie of the Mass in A major, which Spitter thought might be original, also seems, judging from the occasionally strained declamations, to be taken from another work, perhaps a lost cantata. End footnote. The adaptations are perfunctory and occasionally quite nonsensical. In the G minor Mass, for example, Bach adds the text of the Gloria to the gloomy music of the first chorus of the cantata Alles nur nach Gottes Willen, number 72. The Gloria of the A major Mass is an arrangement of the bass solo with chorus Friede sei mit euch from the cantata Halt im Gedächtnis Jesum Christ, number 67. Memory of the earlier work makes him reproduce, in the instrumental accompaniment to the new movement, the contrast between the unrest of the world in which the disciples live in alarm and the peace that the risen Lord brings them. But in the new arrangement he does not trouble in the least about the significance of the music. He fits the instrumental accompaniment to a brisker chorus and has the Gloria in excelsis sung to the tumult motive. In a number of these adaptations he does not even trouble to declaim the words in accordance with their sense. Probably the only original section is the Kyrie of the Mass in F major. It consists of a short but admirable four-part chorus, which the horns and oboes accompany 3 times with the chorale melody Christe du Lamm Gottes, which Bach also employs in the cantata Du waher Gott und Davidson, number 23. In the vocal basses we hear the final Kyrie of the litany. The 2 melodies that run through the movement are as follows. As the litany was sung only in Lent and Advent, and on the first Sunday in Advent the Kyrie was sung to concerted music, Spitta conjectures that the introductory movement of the F major Mass was composed for this Sunday. It represents a splendid blend of Catholic and Protestant church music. The fact that Bach had to make up these masses from his cantatas proves that he did not compose the sections of the Mass used in the Leipzig service. He copied out for this purpose Mass movements and whole Masses of all kinds of composers, known and unknown, German and Italian. But he felt no impulse to set these texts himself. He did not even compose the Sanctus that he had to use on feast days. Of the 4 settings of this text that have come down to us from him, BG 11, C major, D major, D minor, G major, probably only one, that in D major, is his own composition. We shall always regret that he did not write a short, concise Mass as a counterpart to the Magnificat. End of chapter 33.